He mocked the quiet woman standing at the sniper range, calling her ma'am from the county fair.
Two soldiers missed the impossible shot. Then the grandma they laughed at stepped up to the rifle.
Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a military operation, not a charity tour. Captain Marcus Kane's voice carried across the forward operating base with the sharp edge of a man who'd just earned his 4th deployment stripe and mistook authority for wisdom. The dozen special operations candidates observing the classified weapons trial shifted uncomfortably, some smirking behind their hands at the older woman standing quietly near the observation post. She looked like someone's grandmother who'd wandered onto the wrong military installation. Maybe late 50s, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing faded cargo pants and a simple fleece jacket that had seen better days. No uniform, no rank insignia, no explanation for why she was even there. In a landscape dominated by tactical vests, combat boots, and the squared shoulders of America's elite warriors, she was an anomaly, soft-spoken, unassuming, almost invisible. She didn't argue, didn't defend her presence, didn't offer the credentials that would have silenced Kane instantly. She simply nodded once, her pale blue eyes shifting from the customized Macmillan TAC-50, mounted on its advanced firing platform, to the target range stretching into the Montana wilderness. Her gaze lingered on the distant tree line where wind patterns created invisible rivers of air that would make or break the impossible shot they were about to attempt. But across the observation deck, Colonel Sarah Vansa, woman who'd commanded sniper operations in 4 theaters of war, saw something the others missed. It wasn't in the woman's civilian clothes or her age. It was in the way she stood, that peculiar stillness that comes only from thousands of hours behind a scope, the economy of movement, the way her eyes tracked not the rifle, but the environment itself. Colonel Vance recognized a predator at rest. This wasn't just any weapons demonstration. This was a high-stakes trial for a next generation sniper platform destined for Tier 1 units. The audience included Pentagon brass, defense contractors with billion-dollar stakes, and foreign military observers from allied nations. The centerpiece was a shot that would redefine the limits of precision fire, a 3,400-meter target through mountainous terrain with unpredictable thermals and crosswinds that had defeated computer models for weeks. Captain Kane was the chosen shooter, a decorated Army Ranger with multiple combat deployments and a reputation that preceded him. On paper, he was the perfect operator for this moment. He'd been handpicked specifically because his service record was immaculate. His confidence was infectious, and his ability to perform under pressure was supposedly unmatched. He approached the rifle like a peacock approaching its reflection. Every movement was theatrical. He made a production of checking the advanced ballistic computer, of consulting the weather station data, of adjusting the Schmidt and Bender scope with exaggerated precision. He was performing for the cameras, for the generals, for history itself. He chambered the .50 BMG round with a flourish that would have made a magician proud. The quiet woman, Dr. Catherine Catt Morrison, remained motionless at the back of the observation area, but her eyes were locked on details Kane was completely ignoring. The subtle shift in flag movement at 1,000 meters versus 2,000 meters, the mirage patterns dancing just above the ridgeline, the temperature gradient that the meteorological equipment was averaging out, but that would bend the bullet's path in ways the computer couldn't predict. She wasn't watching the shooter. She was solving the problem he hadn't even recognized. The first shot cracked like a thunderbolt. For seconds later, the time it took for the bullet to travel over 2 miles. A dust cloud erupted 15 feet right of the target. A collective intake of breath swept through the observers. Kane's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady, almost dismissive. Thermal pocket at 2,200 meters. Adjusting. He made a show of recalculating, of consulting the computer again, demonstrating his methodical approach. But his movements had lost their fluidity. His hands showed the first tremor of doubt. The second shot thundered. This time, the miss was even worse, 20 feet low and left. The silence that followed was suffocating. Defense contractors checked their watches nervously. The Pentagon observers exchanged glances that could end careers. Foreign military attaches whispered to their aides with barely concealed satisfaction. The entire billion-dollar program was hemorrhaging credibility. With each passing second, Kane stood up from the rifle, his face flushed, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. In a desperate attempt to deflect his failure, he forced a laugh and gestured mockingly toward the gray-haired woman at the back. Hell, maybe Grandma back there wants to take a crack at it. Can't do much worse, right? A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, but Colonel Vance's response cut through the awkward. Laughter like a blade through silk. Actually, Captain, that's an excellent idea. Dr. Morrison, would you please come demonstrate proper wind reading? The temperature on the observation deck dropped 10 degrees. Kane's smirk froze into a mask of confusion. He stammered, "Ma'am, she's a civilian. The liability protocols are my responsibility," Colonel Vance interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of absolute command. "You've had 2 attempts, Captain. Now step aside." Catherine Morrison moved toward the rifle with a fluidity that seemed to slow time itself. Her approach wasn't a walk, it was the calculated advance of a chess master who'd already seen 20 moves ahead. She didn't touch the ballistic computer, didn't consult the weather station, didn't glance at any of the high-tech equipment that Kane had relied upon. Instead, she knelt beside the rifle and did something remarkable. She closed her eyes. For 30 seconds, she simply listened, felt the wind on her face, sensed the subtle shifts in air, pressure that spoke of thermals, rising from sun-baked rocks miles away. When she opened her eyes, her hands moved with surgical precision, adjusting the scope in increments so minute they were barely visible, shifting the bipod position by millimeters, checking the rifle's cant with fingertips that read level like braille. She settled behind the weapon as if it were an extension of her own skeleton. Her breathing slowed to nothing. The entire observation deck fell silent, not because they were ordered to, but because her concentration was so absolute it demanded reverence. The rifle's report was a single, clean crack that echoed off distant mountains. Then nothing. The terrible, beautiful nothing of anticipation. For full seconds of held breath and suspended reality. Then came the sound that would become legend. A crystal clear ping that carried across 3,400 meters of impossible terrain. The sound of perfection. The sound of the impossible made real. The thermal camera feed on the display monitor showed the steel target a perfect, hole punch dead center, the metal still glowing white-hot from the impact. The shot hadn't just hit. It had been surgical. Captain Kane stared at the monitor, then at the woman, then back at the monitor. The color had drained from his face. That's not. The wind data didn't. Catherine Morrison calmly cleared the chamber, her movements as unhurried and precise as a surgeon closing an incision. She didn't look at the monitor. She didn't need confirmation. She had known the exact outcome the moment her finger had completed its press. The observation deck had transformed into a cathedral of shocked silence. Defense contractors were frantically pulling up files on their tablets. Pentagon brass were leaning forward in their seats. The foreign observers were no longer looking at the rifle, they were staring at the unassuming woman who had just redefined what was humanly possible. Colonel Vance walked slowly to the firing line. When she spoke, her voice carried a reverence that startled everyone present. For those of you who don't recognize Dr. Catherine Morrison, let me provide some context. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Dr. Morrison doesn't just hold a PhD in applied physics from MIT. For 12 years, she was the lead architect of the advanced marksmanship science program at Fort Benning. Every long-range shooting manual you've ever studied, she wrote the original research. Every ballistic calculation you've memorized, she derived the formulas. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The name Morrison was legendary in sniper circles, but always as an abstract concept, never as a real person. She was the ghost in the machine, the mind behind the methods that had saved countless lives in theaters from Kandahar to Mogadishu. Dr. Morrison also holds the world record for the longest confirmed combat kill. Colonel Vance continued, her voice dropping to a tone of profound respect. 3,871 meters. Helmand Province, 2009. That record is still classified, which is why you won't find it in any public database. Captain Kane looked like he might be sick. The woman he'd publicly mocked, the civilian he'd treated with casual contempt, was the architect of everything he'd been taught. She was the foundation upon which his entire profession rested. "Colonel." Vance came to attention and rendered a salute so crisp it could have cut glass. "It's an honor to have you on this range, Dr. Morrison." Catherine Morrison simply met her gaze and offered the faintest hint of a smile. She required no further acknowledgement. The perfect hole in steel 3,400 meters away was her signature, the only one that mattered. The respect now being offered wasn't something she'd sought. It was simply the truth finally being recognized by those who'd been blind to it. The story spread through military channels like wildfire through dry grass. Before the sun set, every special operations community from Fort Bragg to Naval Special Warfare Command had heard about the quiet, gray-haired woman who'd humbled one of the Army's finest with a single impossible shot. The tale grew with each retelling, becoming the kind of instant legend that cultures are built upon. It became known as Morrison's Lesson, a story about humility passed down in team rooms and ready rooms across every branch of service. Captain Kane, to his profound credit, didn't hide or make excuses. That evening, he found Dr. Morrison in the base's modest dining facility, sitting alone with a cup of tea and a worn paperback novel. He approached not as an officer, but as a student, his earlier arrogance completely stripped away. "Dr. Morrison," he began, his voice rough with genuine humility, "there's no excuse for my behavior. I was ignorant and disrespectful." He paused, struggling with words. Could you teach me how you read what I couldn't see? The thermals, whatever you saw that the computer missed." Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Then she closed her book and gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Wind isn't data, Captain," she said softly. "It's language. And like any language, you can't learn it from a screen. You have to listen to what the earth is telling you. Sit down. Let's talk about what the mountains were saying today." In that moment, she wasn't a legend or a ghost. She was a teacher passing on knowledge not as power, but as responsibility. The brass casing from her shot was recovered, polished, and mounted on a walnut plaque. It was installed in the main briefing room of the Army's sniper school at Fort Benning, directly above the entrance where every student would see it for decades to come. The engraved brass plate beneath it read, "Dr. Catherine Morrison, 3,400 meters. First, round impact assumptions are heavier than bullets." It became a touchstone, a mandatory teaching moment for every new class. Captain Kane himself became one of the school's most respected instructors, forever changed by his public humbling. He never failed to tell the story of the quiet woman who saw what machines could not, who spoke a language of physics and intuition that he'd been deaf to. He taught his students that the most dangerous person on any battlefield is rarely the loudest. He taught them that true confidence is quiet, that genuine mastery is humble, and that respect is earned not through rank or reputation, but through undeniable demonstration of skill when it matters most. The legend of Catherine Morrison became woven into the fabric of American special operations culture, a reminder that greatness often wears the disguise of the ordinary, and that the most profound expertise announces itself only through its work. Years later, the story endured. It became foundational folklore, a parable told to strip away arrogance and open minds to the reality that competence has no uniform, no age limit, no predictable appearance. The lesson was eternal. Look past the surface. True worth is measured in action, in demonstrated ability under pressure when everything is on the line. Catherine Morrison's legacy wasn't a wall of medals or a highlighted service record. It was in the changed mindset of generations of warriors who learned to listen more than they spoke, to observe more than they assumed, to respect the quiet voices that carried the deepest knowledge. They learned that the most lethal weapon in their arsenal wasn't the rifle in their hands, but the disciplined, observant mind behind it. That day, a legend wasn't just witnessed. It was forged into the very soul of the institution, a testament to the enduring truth that arrogance makes noise, but competence leaves a mark, clear, precise, undeniable, even from over 2 miles away. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, where silent professionalism defines true worth, subscribe to Silent Warriors.